looking at the story of this man named Jacob. We've been looking at him here all summer, and we're going to continue here today. Jacob, this guy who lived in about the 19th century BC, long time ago. And what we've seen over the course of the last several weeks is that the story of Jacob is the story of a man who is growing within his family and is growing beyond his family. And we've seen along the way that there's this big struggle that this man Jacob is going through between Jacob and Jacob. There's this battle between Jacob and himself, between what comes naturally to Jacob and Jacob's destiny that God had promised him, that he was going to be the father of a great nation of people through whom God would bless the entire world. And as Jacob is struggling between some really bad habits and approaches to life that come naturally, this guy whose parents named him, paraphrased, backstabber, versus his destiny as the ancestor of a people that God was going to use to save the world. That struggle between Jacob and Jacob spawns another struggle. It's a struggle that we saw early on between Jacob and his twin brother Esau. That struggle between Jacob and Esau spawned yet another struggle. As Jacob fled from Esau, who was going to take vengeance on him for how Jacob had cheated Esau out of his position in the family, Jacob ran to his uncle Laban. And so there's another struggle that we saw between Jacob and Laban, because Laban is the one person in the book of Genesis who's sneakier than Jacob is. Now, what we saw last week is the beginning of something that we're going to see this week, and that is that the struggle between Jacob and Laban itself spawned another struggle between Leah and Rachel, Laban's two daughters, who both end up marrying Jacob. That in turn, the struggle between Leah and Rachel will spawn yet another struggle between Jacob's son Joseph and his other brothers. We're not even going to get into that one. That one is, we're going to cut off our tour through Genesis before we get to that point. But what you see here is this cascade, this waterfall of family conflict, where conflict between two parties grows into conflict between others, and it just keeps going and going and going and going, even into future generations. That's because family conflicts spread. Family conflicts spread because family conflicts are unwinnable wars. When a conflict starts in a family, the natural inclination for many people when they engage in conflict is to win that conflict. But the thing about family conflicts is that you just can't win them. Now, it's natural to believe that you can. When there's a struggle between you and somebody else, when there's an argument or a war of words, or somebody did something they shouldn't have done or didn't do something that they promised to do, or whatever, it's natural to believe that if you just concoct the perfect argument or the perfect comeback, the perfect thing to say, then that'll do it. That'll solve the problem, you know? That will either fix the person or it will put the person in their place, right? And I'm talking to kids here today, too. I know we've got some kids here. And when you get into an argument with your siblings, with your brothers or sisters, right, you might think that there's like the perfect thing. If I just say this, man, that'll put them in their place. They're going to have no response to this. Does that ever work? Does that ever solve the problem? No, it doesn't solve the problem, does it, girls? Nope, doesn't solve the problem, right? And what happens when you're a kid, especially, is that fortunately God has blessed you when you're a kid with like a short enough like attention span or a short enough memory that even though the conflict is never really won and never really resolved, given enough time, you kind of just forget about it and just go on and do whatever you're doing anyway. But that falls apart as you get older. And the memory grows longer, the attention span grows longer, and things don't just stop just because the war isn't won. The battle is just put off to another day. It's just extended a little bit further on. And it goes and it goes and it goes. And you will think, you know, if she would just listen, or if he would just agree that, or if he would just stop doing, or if she would just whatever, then all of this will be fine. But you can't win. Family conflicts can end, but they don't end by you winning. They don't. Now, if you're not convinced that family conflicts are unwinnable wars, let me tell you this story here from Jacob's family and see if it sounds familiar to your experience, okay? So we're looking here at Genesis chapter 29. We're going to start at verse 31, and we're going to work our way through this whole section, the NIV, that says Jacob's children. We're going to work all the way through chapter 30, verse 24, and I'm just going to make comments here as we go along. So once again, as a reminder, we've got this guy Jacob. He is working for his uncle Laban. He has married his two first cousins, Leah and Rachel, which was not a crazy or unusual thing back then. In fact, they had never seen each other until Jacob showed up as he was fleeing because they lived 400 miles apart. But what happened was that Jacob wanted to marry Rachel. Laban said, sure, you can marry Rachel. But then on the night of the wedding, he snuck Leah in instead, so that he had to marry Leah. And because polygamy was acceptable in that society, said, okay, well, you can have Rachel too, but you're going to have to work for me for another 7 years. So Jacob has married two women. He wanted the one. He didn't want the other one. He wanted the younger one. He didn't want the older one, Leah. And so now there's these two sisters who are also rival wives, whom Jacob prefers one, doesn't care for the other. So here in Genesis 29, verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Okay, now those words, again, like I said, I'm going to stop periodically as we go through. Those words, not loved, it literally means in the Hebrew hated. Now, hated, though, does not necessarily mean what we mean by hated. When we say hated, we mean they've got like a strong animosity toward the person. Jacob probably didn't have strong animosity toward Leah, though he may have. But he didn't like her. He definitely didn't like her. And she was a reminder to him of how Laban had cheated him. And she's also a reminder to him of how he had cheated his older brother Esau. We saw last week about how this is payback for how Jacob, the younger son, cheated the older son. Now the older daughter is paying him back. Okay, so the Lord sees that Leah is not loved. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Rachel had no children. We'll get into why that's significant here in a moment. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Now, we're going to see a series of kids getting born and mothers giving them a name because blah, blah, blah. Okay, we're going to see a lot of that. And each of the names that you see there sounds kind of like the thing that the mother says. Okay, so it's giving an explanation for these names, what these names mean. Okay, so the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. Okay, verse 33. She conceived again. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So she named him Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children. Okay? So Leah, by the grace of God, is able to bear children. She conceives and bears 4 sons. Okay? Why is this a big deal? Why is this important? It's important for several reasons. One reason that it's important is looking at Leah and Rachel, about how Leah is able to have children, Rachel is not able to have children. Keep in mind, this is God looking at Leah and saying, "I'm going to bless Leah because I see that her husband doesn't love her. So I'm going to give her something. I'm going to give her children." Okay? You know, to this day, it's something that seems to be in us as a species. To this day, even in our society today, I have never heard a woman say, I want to have we wanted to have children. I cannot have children. We cannot have children, but it's okay with us. It's not that big a deal. Now, maybe there are women who have thought this, but they've not said it. But anytime I have encountered a woman who had trouble having children or could not have children, it was a cause of great pain to that woman. And I have to say right now, in case there's anybody here who falls into that category, I'll just be very forthright with you. As a man, A, and as a father, B, who had their first child come way ahead of plan, C, I'll be honest with you, I can only sympathize with this. I cannot empathize. I won't even pretend that I can grasp the pain of that, which I know is very deep and very real and very severe. But if you think that that pain is deep and real and severe today, as just part of our biological makeup, just how God made us, you have to understand that as a whole layer on top of that, in this place and day, women believed, I mean, what they were taught and was ground into them as they were being raised is that the very reason for their existence was to bear children. I mean, that is why they lived on this earth. Like that was like the meaning of life for a woman in that society. And not just to bear children in general, but in specific to bear a son or sons. Why? Because this son was going to carry on the name and the ancestry and the lineage of the whole family. Daughters were married outside of the family and therefore could not carry on the heritage of that family line. And so this was the meaning of life for a woman in that place and day. I mean, like this was the only job available. Right? This was not like, what am I going to be when I grow up? Well, there's these different options of how I might make my mark in the world. This is the way that you make your mark in the world. So for Leah to conceive and to bear a son was enormously satisfying, not only because now she's a mother of children, but because she has now fulfilled her duty in her family. She has achieved the mission for which she was born. I have borne a son to my husband. Now, surely he will love me. Surely my husband will love me now, because I've done the thing that I was put on this earth to do for him. Okay? And she's thinking, my sister hasn't. So this will surely get his attention. Surely he'll love me now. And it's so sad. It's so grievous. It's so pathetic. I mean, one's heart just goes out to Leah as she conceives son number 1, Reuben, son number 2, Simeon, son number 3, Levi, and every single name that she gives these 3 sons is all a variation of, why won't my husband love me? Surely he'll love me now. But it doesn't work. And it doesn't work. And it doesn't work. I love the 4th, right? Judah, this time I will praise the Lord. This is her first comment that indicates giving glory to God, that the focus is on God and not on the husband. Why Judah is that one, why he stands out, is unclear at the time in the moment, although it will become significant, because who will be descended from Judah? David, the one who praised the Lord in the book of Psalms, who danced before the Lord with all his might, was descended from Judah. And Jesus is descended from Judah. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So she has these 4 sons. She has 4 sons. Rachel has 0 sons. She stops having children. She's hoping maybe this is going to get Jacob's attention. Still hasn't worked. But in chapter 30, verse 1, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. We have a situation here where we have Rachel, who has the love and affection of her husband but no children, and is obsessed with Leah having children. And we have Leah, who has children but does not have the attention of her husband and is obsessed with not having the attention of her husband. We have each one has one and is obsessed with the other that they don't have. And so Rachel sees this and she says, end of verse 1, so she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." That's a little bit dramatic, but it may not be over dramatic. It may not be over dramatic. Again, I mean, Rachel is kind of seeing, if I don't bear children here, what is the meaning of my life? I'm a nothing if I don't bear children. That's what she's thinking, and she's had all this conditioning as good reason to believe that. Okay? And why is she going to Jacob as if like this is Jacob's fault, right? Again, remember, Jacob loves Rachel. Jacob doesn't love Leah. Jacob loves Rachel, okay? So Jacob, because he loves Rachel, is giving ample opportunity for Rachel to conceive, okay? She goes to Jacob, give me children or I die. Maybe she knows, maybe Jacob told her, maybe she knows that it was Abraham, Jacob's grandfather, it was his relationship and covenant with God in which God said to Abraham, I'm going to cause your wife Sarah to bear even though she's 90 years old. Maybe Rachel knew that Jacob's father Isaac prayed for his wife Rebekah who could not bear children. And it was because Isaac prayed to God that God opened Rebekah so that Rebekah could have children. Maybe Rachel's thinking Jacob isn't going to God. He's not praying to God and asking for me to bear children. Who knows? But what Jacob's response is, verse 2, Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children? I mean, that's a harsh response. That's a tough response. But Rachel's response to that is, then she said, here is Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family. What it says there more literally in the Hebrew is that on her knees I too can build a family, which was a phrase that had to do with adoption. We don't know if it necessarily means like what we would call adoption, like legal adoption, but the point is that the way this is going to happen, we saw it last summer. If you were with us last summer, we were looking through the story of Abraham earlier in Genesis. We saw this phenomenon where a woman who could not bear children, again, it's her duty to bear children, and so sometimes a method that she would use was surrogate motherhood, in that she would have her own servant, her own slave, whatever, and would say to her husband, take my slave as your concubine, and then she will become sort of a second-tier wife. And so she'll be kind of like a wife, but not exactly like a wife. And then any children that she bears, or at least the next child that she bears, counts as my child. So because I can't bear children, I'm going to do what I need to do so that a son can be born. And so she goes to Jacob, Rachel does, and says, take Bilhah and do it this way. And so, which was a common thing. And so she gave him, we see verse 4, she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Okay? So, and I feel terrible because we're going to see this again later on in this passage. I mean, this is what happens in conflict, right? You've got this conflict going on between Jacob and himself, which spawns a struggle between Jacob and Esau, which spawns a struggle between Jacob and Laban, which spawns a struggle between Leah and Rachel. And because of this increasing war, where each is trying to get the advantage over the other one, each is trying to win over the other one in their significance and their acceptance within their family, now it's actually involving other people, so that Bilhah here, on the one hand, she gets promoted within the family because she goes from just being a slave to being a concubine, which is a promotion. But on the other hand, she's now not able to marry some other slave and have another child of her own. Now, every child that she has is going to count as Rachel's child. So again, Rachel is obsessed over not having her own children, and her means of addressing it is going to take away from Bilhah her name of having her own children. Okay? So it's using this slave to get what I want. So verse 4, Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali. So again, we see with Rachel with these names that she's thinking, see, now I win. See, now I'm dominant over my sister. Why is this so important? I mean, again, keep in mind what's going on here and how this even came to be. Jacob works for 7 years for Rachel. He's made this contract with Laban, his uncle. I'll work for you 7 years because I don't have the money to give you a bride price. So in exchange for that, you're going to give me your daughter Rachel. Laban says, okay. It gets to the first night of the week-long wedding feast. It's dark. She's veiled. Jacob has had a lot to drink. Laban gives Leah to Jacob instead. Okay? Do you think Leah was unaware of what was going on? Do you think Leah was just like, okay, Dad, whatever you say? No. Leah is involved in this deception. I mean, it's not like she's not aware of what's going on. It's not like she doesn't know what's happening there. Okay? And so Rachel all along has seen Leah as being this person who's not supposed to be there. She's not supposed to be in this marriage. She's not supposed to be in this family. Okay? She snuck in. And Rachel's mad, and Rachel now, and Leah is probably thinking, well, hey, I'm the one who's supposed to be here. You, Rachel, are not supposed to be here, and God has proven that I'm supposed to be here because I have kids, and you don't have kids. But now Rachel has kids, sort of, and so she's saying, see, I was right all along. But you can see son number 1, see, I was right all along. Son number 2, see, I was right all along. Do you think Leah's believing that? Again, unwinnable war, right? I mean, no matter how much you think, okay, this is going to finally shut up my sister, doesn't shut her up. Because in verse 9, when Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her maidservant, Zilpah, and gave her to Jacob as a wife, right? Two can play at this game. So Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, what good fortune. And so she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, how happy I am. The women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. Okay, so it's just, gone up a level, right? So now, verse 14, during wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. Now, these mandrakes, these are like these little, fleshy, fruity kinds of things. They grow wild. And they were believed at that time to have medicinal properties. Maybe they did have medicinal properties. And among the medicinal properties they were expected to have, included as an aphrodisiac and or maybe as a fertility drug. So when Rachel says to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes, I mean, again, Rachel is desperate. She's like, he found these things. Please let me have some of those so that I can conceive children. Leah's response, verse 15, but she said to her, wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? Very well, Rachel said, he can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Because keep in mind, right, Jacob doesn't love Leah. Jacob's only reason for sleeping with Leah is to produce children through Leah. When Leah's not producing children anymore, there's no reason for Jacob to sleep with her anymore. And so what happens? Rachel sells Jacob to Leah in exchange for these mandrakes. Okay, so verse 16, so when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. You must sleep with me, she said. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he slept with her that night. So this is what it's come to, right? It's come to the point that Jacob is now being sold for favors to his wife, right? I mean, this is humiliating. This is humiliating. But what happens, okay? Verse 17, God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband. This is how she's rationalizing this. So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun, right? She keeps thinking that this will be the one. Yeah, the other ones didn't work. Zebulun, this is going to be the one that's going to change his mind. Probably not. Verse 21, sometime later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Now, here's what's interesting about that Dinah. She's being mentioned now, and there may be other daughters that are in there too that we don't know about. It's hard to say. But Dinah's being mentioned now because she shows up later on in Genesis in a passage we're not going to read here, but we're getting an indication now that she's coming along. We don't see here a description of why is she named Dinah the way we see with the other names, but I can actually tell you because that word, Dinah, it's sort of a feminine version of a word meaning judgment or avenging, right? So even with the daughter's name, it's Leah saying like, God has seen my cause and is avenging me, for this injustice that's being done to me of my sister coming in here and taking away my husband, okay? But then, verse 22, then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace, right? She says, finally, God has proven that it's not like I'm some terrible sinner, that it's not like I'm some terrible person, that God is judging me by not giving me children. God has taken away my disgrace. He's taken away my shame. I now have a child of my own. And is she satisfied? Is she happy? Is she thrilled? Well, kind of. Verse 24, she named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. See, it's never enough. It's never enough. As long as Leah's still running her mouth, it's never enough. And for Leah, as long as Rachel is still running her mouth, it's never enough. It's never enough. It's the unwinnable war. It's this conflict that goes on and on and on. And so if we could go back, and if we could talk to Rachel and Leah, if we could give them some advice, if you could give them some advice in this situation, what would you say? What would you tell them to do? What's the solution for Leah in this situation that's not a good situation, but a situation that she cooperated with getting herself into? What would you say to Rachel in this situation, who has the privilege, who has the preference, but doesn't have the children? What would you say to them about their relationship with one another? Is it worth it? Are either of them going to win? What advice might they listen to? Well, I'm not really sure what advice they would listen to, but I think I know what I might say. And I think that is that the only way to end an unwinnable war is to stop fighting it. The only way to end an unwinnable war is to stop fighting it. To just stop fighting. I'm talking about a ceasefire today. I'm not talking about peace. Peace is preferable, and peace is important, okay? And a ceasefire is not peace. Just not fighting is not peace. If you got people who are not fighting, but there's injustice in their relationship with one another, that's not peace. If you got people who are not fighting, but they don't love one another, and they should, it's not peace. Peace is what we're going for. Peace is what we want, okay? However, it's very often hard to get peace without a ceasefire. If there's fighting, and we need to get peace, ceasefire is a preliminary step. Let's just first stop fighting each other. And then maybe we can work on the relationship. Then maybe we can put some things back together. So I'm not talking about peace today, but I am talking about a ceasefire. And it's important, a ceasefire is not letting the other person win. Keep in mind, this is an unwinnable war. By definition, they cannot win. So in other words, if the other person is running their mouth, if the person, your sibling or your parent or your cousin or the person at work or your spouse or whatever, if they're saying what they're saying, if they're nagging, if they're doing the thing, whatever, it can often feel like if I don't say anything, then they've won. They haven't won. Again, unwinnable war. They can't win. They cannot win. Okay? So ceasing, choosing to stop fighting is not letting the other person win. What it is doing is it's giving up winning yourself. It's saying, I am no longer motivated. My goal is no longer to win this fight. My goal is no longer to be vindicated. It's no longer for the other person to say, you were right, I was wrong. My goal is no longer even to hear the other person say they're sorry. That might be nice someday, but all I'm doing right now is I'm just not going to participate in this rivalry, in this duel, in this struggle anymore. That's a hard thing to do. Because here's what goes along with that. Here's what goes along with stopping the fighting in an unwinnable war. It means you're saying, I'm going to let you have what you have. It's Leah saying to Rachel, I'm going to let you have the love of Jacob. It's Rachel saying to Leah, I'm going to let you have the kids. All right? I'm going to let you have what you have that I wish I had, but I don't have. I'm going to let you have the attention of so-and-so. I'm going to let you have the privilege that I don't have. I'm going to let you have that. It's also saying, I'm going to let you keep fighting. So in other words, I'm choosing to stop fighting, but if you want to go ahead and keep fighting with me, I can't stop you from doing that, so have at it. You know? I'm not going to make the sarcastic comments to you anymore, but if you're going to continue to make sarcastic comments, what am I going to do, right? I can't shut you up. I can't gag you, so go ahead. I'm going to let you do that. I'm going to let you keep fighting. And third, I'm going to let you believe that I'm the bad guy. I'm going to let you believe that it's my fault. I'm going to let you believe that if I was just fixed or if I was just different, then it wouldn't be this way. Now, I don't believe that, but I'm going to let you believe that. I'm going to allow that to go on in your head without trying to force you to change your mind. Those are the kinds of things that you got to come to a conclusion about inside yourself in order to break out of this cycle that never ends. This cycle of conflict that goes on and on and on and on and on. To just choose, this is not going to dictate my life anymore. This is not going to run me anymore. Now, it can feel like if you make these concessions, I'm going to let you have what you have. I'm going to let you keep fighting. I'm going to let you believe that I'm the bad guy, that you've lost something. But you know what? You haven't really lost anything because you never really had it to begin with. You never really had what they had. You could never really stop them from doing what they were doing. And you could never really change their mind. That's in their own heads. Now, how do you initiate a ceasefire? If you come to this point within yourself, when you're actually in the presence of the other person, that you're in this conflict with that just keeps going back and forth, what do you do? What do you do in that moment? What do you do around the dinner table? What do you do on the drive to work? What do you do in that situation? Well, here's my homespun wisdom for you, okay? Take it or leave it, do with it as you may. Appreciate what you can, ignore what you can't, leave when you must. This is my recipe for a ceasefire, okay? Appreciate what you can. Whatever is in that person that is actually reasonable or good or decent, focus on that, okay? Give it credit. Pay attention to it, appreciate it. Whatever the person says, does, whatever that you can't appreciate, ignore it. Ignore it. Just make a deliberate decision, I am not going to focus on this. And if you're in a situation where it's just beyond what you can handle, you cannot ignore what is so problematic about what the person says and does. And it makes you want to scream, or it makes you want to lash out and say that harsh or barbed thing, or do that underhanded thing, or spread that gossip, or whisper with somebody else, or whatever. Leave. Get out. Right? Get out before you do that. Okay? Appreciate what you can, ignore what you can't, leave when you must. That is my very simple, ordinary, down-to-earth approach for initiating a ceasefire. And you just maintain that for as long as you need to maintain that. The Bible says in Romans 12, Paul says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with all people. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with all people. That's what this is about. This is about, if I could make it happen, there would be total peace between me and this other person. This other person does not want peace right now. But the best I can do is this. This is the most I can do. So as far as it depends on me, there's peace. Okay? Now, I want to encourage you also. You might not be in a situation where you've got to call a ceasefire in a relationship in your life right now. Maybe you were at one time. Maybe you will be again. Maybe you're not in that situation right now. But I bet you know somebody who is. I bet there is somebody that you know who's a good friend of yours, or who talks to you, who says, this is my situation with so-and-so, and this is what's going on. And you know what? Maybe this is for that person today. Maybe when you talk to that person this week, maybe when you're texting with them or whatever, you can say, you know what? Let me tell you something that I heard in church this Sunday. And the person might say, You hear that kind of stuff in church, and you say, yeah, I hear that kind of stuff in church. You know what? You should come with me to church sometime. We talk about all kinds of good stuff like this, right? So use this as an opportunity to give something of value to somebody else that might get them to see, hey, when Christians get together and do their Christian thing, there's value there that affects life, because we know that it's actually coming from the Bible. It's actually coming from the Lord Jesus Christ. And we want to introduce somebody to that, okay? But I want to give you another reason for hope here from this sad story. Again, as we've seen the life of Jacob, we've seen some sad stories, and it is going to get better. It's going to get better. It's not going to get better next week. Well, it's going to get a little better, but it's going to be weird. But eventually it's going to get a lot better. But it's been some tough stuff. But here's some hope in this. Family conflicts can't stop God's plan. You know that? Family conflicts cannot stop God's plan. Your conflict that you're in with somebody, you might think, oh my goodness, how great would things be if this were not the case? God would really do wonderful things in my life or wonderful things in our family if only this conflict wasn't here. Let me tell you something. Family conflicts cannot stop God's plan, because God is involved through this whole thing. God is the one who's deciding Leah's going to bear children right now. And then Leah is going to bear children again. And then Rachel's going to bear children right now. God is planning this whole thing. Now the women are interpreting what God is doing through their own framework. That is not necessarily what his reasoning is. But God is working with all this. And the reason is that God is actually using this conflict as his tool to make a nation. See, these sons that are getting born here, and a 12th one who hasn't been born yet, he gets born later, okay? But these sons are going to form the structure of the people of God. They're going to be the fathers of 12 tribes that are going to be the 12 tribes of this nation through whom God is going to communicate with the whole world. And this is a permanent structure. It is so permanent that even at some later point that comes well after this story, some later point that comes, that then people who are not physically descended from Jacob get to have the same intimacy and relationship and destiny from God that Jacob's descendants have. Even then, this structure of these 12 tribes is still there. It's still ongoing in the people of God, literally for eternity. Because, see, Jesus, a descendant of Jacob, said to his 12 disciples, his 12 closest ones that he called apostles. We can read this in Matthew 19:28. He says, "You who have been with me in my trials will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." And when we go to the very end of the Bible, the very last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, we see the people of God described according to these 12. And we see this beautiful image that there's going to be this perfect paradise in the future where God completely transforms everything. He completely makes an entirely new world where everything is perfect and there's no war and there's no conflict and there's no viciousness anymore. And in that place, he describes his people in Revelation with the metaphor of a city. And he says, in this city, there are 12 gates, and the 12 gates are named for the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, out of this conflict where Leah and Rachel are so angry at each other, they're so ferociously angry at each other, they're so jealous, they're so frustrated, they're so grieved, they're so messed up, that in the middle of this, God is taking that to forge the structure of the people who will live forever in eternity with glory and joy before God. Isn't that incredible? So your family conflicts that you're in, that you might be thinking are frustrating God's plan, for all you know, God could be using those to forge a destiny that you cannot imagine. I think there's great hope there. And see, this prophecy that I talked about this future utopia that is coming is important, because right now, human beings are themselves in an unwinnable war. We are all born into an unwinnable war against God. A war with God that we cannot win. Human beings are born wanting to do their own thing, wanting to do things their way, wanting to set their own agenda, wanting to satisfy themselves, wanting to find their own purpose and their own meaning and their own identity, and everybody look at me, and I want what I want, and I want to arrange my life in order to get it. And that, no matter how ordinary, no matter how simple, no matter how unobtrusive it is to one's neighbors, is sin. Because it's saying that God is not God, I am. God is not the one in charge, I'm in charge of my life to run it the way I see fit. And because of that, we're in an unwinnable war against God. We are warring against him as rebels, and we cannot win that war because he's way stronger than us. He made us. We're only breathing because he chooses to let us do it. The difference between the war between family members and the war between humans and God is that even though we can't win, God can. The only question is how he's going to do it. And God could win by destroying us. He could win by just wiping us out. You can just say, I quit. You know, there's a story in the Bible in Genesis about a flood where God chose to do just that. This isn't working out. They're gone. Okay? So God could choose to win that way. He could win by destroying us. He could win by just annihilating us. Or he could win by making us eternally very, very unhappy in our unhappiness. But God chose an alternate way to win, and that is reconciling us. He chose that the way that he wanted to win was by getting us to surrender so that we could actually have eternal joy with him. And the way he chose to do that was that God the Father chose God the Son to become one of us, to become human with the name Jesus, to come among us with the olive branch of peace, saying, arms open wide, if you lay down your arms, if you surrender now, you can come and you can enjoy being with me. So yeah, will you be in charge of your own life? No. I will. And your life is going to be way better than it is right now. Sound like a deal? And we said, no. Tack, tack, tack. Hung him on a cross. Hung him on a cross. We would rather have our own misery than have it God's way and happiness. But Jesus knew that, and God the Father knew that, and he died on that cross so that all of our crimes and all of our rebellion could die with him there, so that God would absorb all of the pain of our broken relationship into himself and give us nothing but pardon and joy. So that anybody who believes in Jesus, who trusts that Jesus is that Son of God, that he rose again from the dead on the third day as proof that he was who he said he was and that he's coming back again to make that new and perfect world, can have a stake in it. God is going to win your war with him, but you get to choose how he wins. Would you rather God win by destroying you? Would you rather God win by sending you to hell? Would you rather God win by condemning you eternally? Or would you rather God win by giving you eternal life and happiness and blessedness? I mean, it's up to you. You're not going to win. God's going to win. But you get to choose how it happens. And letting him win means that you're saying, I'm going to let you have what you have, God. You have the supremacy. You have the glory. You have the self-sufficiency. I don't. I'm going to let you keep fighting for what you want from me, namely my obedience. I'm going to let you keep coming after me and keep telling me what to do, and I'm going to keep obeying it. And finally, I'm going to let you believe that I'm the bad guy, because as a matter of fact, I am the bad guy. I'm going to let you believe that. In fact, I'm going to agree with it. And if you do that, if you stop fighting that war against God, you get forgiveness. You get everything you were fighting for. You get glorious satisfaction with him. So I implore you today, end the unwinnable war. End your unwinnable war against God. Let him win in a way that is way better than him forcing his victory on you. We have in our bulletin every week, and this week as well, this card, and I'd like you to get that. We have it, if you didn't get a bulletin today, it's in front of you. And I'd like you to take that and tear it in half. And the side that says First Baptist Church of Hollidaysburg, on the flip side of that, there are options for what you might do with this message. And what I just described to you about ending the unwinnable war, that corresponds to, at the top, turn to Jesus as my Savior and Master for the first time. Or maybe you've already done that in the past, but at the same time, you've You've still sort of been fighting. You've still sort of been resisting in an area, and maybe you need to repent and devote yourself to follow Jesus again. Or maybe there is that person in your life or in your family that you just need to call a ceasefire with, even if they keep harassing you, so that someday there might be peace. Or maybe there's somebody that you need to tell this message to this week that's going to be helpful to them. Whatever it is that the Lord has indicated to you this week, I want you to write that down on this card. Save it. Keep it with you as a reminder to you during the week. And on the other side, if you'll take that and write your name at the top, any contact information so I can keep up with you. And then on the flip side, any questions you might have, any reports you might have to me of what God is doing in your life, or any way that we can pray for you, please write that down as well, and either put it in my hand or put it in the wall hanger on the back as you walk downstairs. As we take this time to connect with God and as to respond to Him according to His Word, let's do this, and when you've completed doing that, let's sing along the song that Kelly's going to lead us in.